The Grand Hall of the Galactic Council was a sight to behold. A cavernous chamber carved out of shimmering, translucent material that seemed to glow with an inner light. Hundreds of alien delegates filled the tiers of the arena-like structure, a kaleidoscope of colors, shapes, and sizes. The air buzzed with the hum of countless languages, blending into a cacophony of anticipation and speculation. This was no ordinary summit. The usual pre-summit agendas were absent, and a veil of mystery hung over the proceedings. Something unprecedented was about to unfold. At the center of the hall, standing alone on a raised platform, was a human. David Cross, an ordinary negotiator from a distant space colony, looked as though he had been plucked from his mundane life and dropped into the galaxy's spotlight without warning. He wore a simple suit, a stark contrast to the elaborate attire and vibrant, ceremonial garments of the alien dignitaries surrounding him. He shifted awkwardly on his feet, his eyes darting from one side of the room to the other, clearly overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the assembly. He didn't belong here, not among the most powerful and influential beings in the galaxy. The silence that stretched over the hall as David made his entrance was deafening. All eyes, some glowing, others multifaceted, a few with no discernible pupils at all, were fixed on the lone human. The camera of the broadcast zoomed in, capturing his face in sharp detail. The furrowed brow, the nervous swallow, the uncertainty in his gaze. He had no idea why he was here. He had been taken from a routine mediation session on a small trade dispute, whisked away by Galactic Council envoys who offered no explanation, only a directive that he was needed urgently. Around him, the gathered representatives were a spectacle of diversity. There were the tall, slender Shulkrai with their luminescent skin that pulsed in rhythmic waves, reflecting their confusion. Next to them stood the massive, armored figures of the Kthari, their exoskeletons glinting under the hall's golden lights. A group of Kitaxians, with their flowing, semi-liquid forms, shifted uneasily, their bodies rippling like disturbed water. They all seemed perplexed, casting sideways glances at each other, whispering in hushed tones that the universal translator struggled to keep up with. "What is a human doing here?" one alien murmured, its voice a mix of clicks and hisses. "Is this some kind of mistake?" another questioned, its eyes narrowing suspiciously. David could hear snippets of the dialogue, the words echoing through the hall. He could sense the undercurrent of skepticism, the unspoken disbelief that someone like him, a human, an outsider, could be the focus of this unprecedented gathering. The tension in the room reached a breaking point when the Supreme Speaker, a towering figure with tentacle-like appendages draped in ceremonial robes, stepped forward. The speaker's voice, deep and resonant, cut through the murmurs like a blade. "Silence," the speaker commanded, raising a hand adorned with bioluminescent rings that glowed softly, a gesture that held the authority of the entire council. A hush fell over the hall as the speaker looked directly at David. The spotlight above intensified, casting a harsh, solitary beam on him, making him appear even smaller and more vulnerable amidst the grandeur of the hall. The crowd held its collective breath, waiting for the speaker to continue. "Today's summit," the speaker intoned, their voice reverberating through the chamber, "is unlike any we have held before. Today, we gather not for politics, not for negotiations, but for a matter far greater, a recognition that transcends our borders, our species, our very understanding of unity." David's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know what was coming next, but he could feel the weight of it pressing down on him, the anticipation of the moment heavy in the air. He stood there, exposed, caught in the gaze of the galaxy's most powerful beings, with no clue why he had been brought here or what they expected from him. The speaker paused, allowing the tension to build, the silence thick and heavy. Then, with a solemn nod, they gestured towards David. "Behold," the speaker said, their voice softer now, almost reverent. "The one who stands before us today is not merely a man. He is a symbol, a testament to the quiet, unseen acts that have shaped the fate of us all." The spotlight on David grew brighter, illuminating him as if he were the sun in this vast constellation of alien life. And in that moment, the entire hall seemed to hold its breath, the anticipation palpable, as if the galaxy itself were waiting for what would come next. The Supreme Speaker took a step back, surveying the sea of alien faces as if measuring their readiness for what was to come. The audience leaned in, curious yet skeptical. Why would the Galactic Council hold such a prestigious ceremony for a mere human, and an unremarkable one at that? The speaker's deep voice filled the silence, carrying a weight that demanded attention. In the past decade, the speaker began, our galaxy has faced numerous crises. Some were well known, others barely registered in the public consciousness. Today, I will recount a few of these incidents, not as isolated events, but as part of a larger pattern, a pattern centered on one individual standing before us now. David's eyes widened. He had expected anything but this. He had been a mediator, a negotiator, a simple problem solver. The idea that his work was significant enough to be mentioned at a Galactic Council meeting seemed absurd. He glanced around nervously, but the Supreme Speaker pressed on, leaving no room for interruption. The first memory the speaker conjured was of a small mining colony on the edge of known space. The holographic projectors in the hall came to life, casting a vivid image of the incident into the air for all to see. The colony had been on the brink of disaster after a critical equipment failure threatened to cause a catastrophic cave-in. It was David who, upon noticing an overlooked safety measure in the colony's outdated manual, directed the workers to reinforce a weakened section of the tunnel just in time. He hadn't solved it with advanced technology or brute force, but with keen observation and a basic understanding of human and alien engineering. The aliens in the image looked at him with a mix of shock and gratitude as their home was saved. The scene dissolved into another memory, this one of a bustling trade route in the dense traffic lanes of the Zyran Nebula. Pirate activity had surged in the area, causing chaos and fear among the traders. While others called for increased military patrols and aggressive tactics, it was David who proposed a simple, effective plan. He organized a convoy system that combined the resources of various species, turning potential targets into formidable, well-coordinated fleets. The pirates, outmatched and unable to breach the convoy's defenses, quickly abandoned their raids. Once again, David had found a solution not through violence, but by uniting disparate factions. The final memory brought the assembly to a hushed stillness. It was the scene of a heated negotiation between two warring species, the Valtarians and the Clyth. The council had sent numerous diplomats, all of whom had failed to broker peace. David had been there only as a junior advisor, observing quietly in the background. Yet, it was he who noticed the common mineral resource the two species were fighting over could be sustainably shared if processed differently. He proposed a compromise, a shared research facility where both sides could benefit from the mineral without conflict. It was a solution that seemed so obvious in hindsight, yet it had eluded the most experienced alien diplomats. The warring factions, stunned by the simplicity and fairness of the idea, agreed to the truce. The flashbacks faded, and the hall returned to the present. David stood there, his mind reeling from the memories, moments he had almost forgotten in the whirlwind of daily life. He had always stepped aside once the immediate crisis was resolved, thinking of his actions as merely part of his job. But here, today, they were being recounted as pivotal moments in galactic history. The Supreme Speaker allowed the room a moment to absorb the revelations. The gathered dignitaries exchanged looks, a mixture of shock, admiration, and respect growing in their eyes. The speaker turned back to David, their tentacle-like appendages waving gently as they spoke. It is rare, indeed, for the Council to honor any single individual, especially one from a species still considered newcomers on the galactic stage. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, but it was different now. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a dawning realization that they had been in the presence of someone extraordinary all along. David Cross, the speaker continued, their tone softening. Your actions, though seemingly small and unnoticed at the time, have had a profound impact. You have prevented conflicts, saved lives, and created a model of cooperation and understanding that many of our own diplomats have begun to emulate. In your humility, you never sought recognition, but today, we recognize you as a beacon of unity. The camera panned across the room, capturing the looks of awe on the faces of the alien delegates. Even the stern, battle-hardened Kthari seemed moved, their rigid stances softened. For the first time, the galaxy saw David not as an ordinary human, but as a quiet hero whose consistent acts of kindness and diplomacy had left an indelible mark. David felt a swell of emotions: disbelief, gratitude, and an overwhelming sense of humility. He had always thought of himself as an average negotiator, just doing his job. He had never imagined that his small acts would be woven together into a narrative that spanned the galaxy, one that spoke of the quiet power of human compassion and the ability to find common ground even among the most disparate of beings. As the Supreme Speaker stepped aside, the Grand Hall fell into a silence so deep it seemed to swallow the air. The anticipation was palpable, a shared breath held by the galaxy's most influential beings. David stood alone at the center, still struggling to comprehend the gravity of what was unfolding. He had never imagined himself at the heart of such an extraordinary event, let alone being honored by the entire Galactic Council. His confusion was clear, his eyes wide, searching the faces around him for some clue of what to do next. Then, something unimaginable happened. From the back of the hall, a figure began to move forward. It was a towering crystalline entity known as a Virkon, a species renowned for their unyielding pride and steadfast refusal to bow to anyone outside their own kind. The Virkon diplomat, its body shimmering like a pillar of polished quartz, stepped onto the platform with an air of solemnity. The room seemed to hold its breath as the Virkon paused, meeting David's bewildered gaze. And then, in one fluid motion, the Virkon lowered itself onto one knee, bowing its head deeply in David's direction. The light from the hall refracted through its crystalline form, casting rainbows that danced across the walls like a sacred, ethereal light show. Gasps rippled through the crowd. This was a gesture no one had ever witnessed before. The Virkon, known across the galaxy for their fierce pride, were bowing to a human. David's mouth fell open, his hand instinctively reaching out as if to protest, but he was too stunned to speak. He glanced around, hoping this was some kind of mistake or misunderstanding, but the look on the Virkon's face, or what could be interpreted as a face, was sincere. It wasn't bowing to him as a person, but to what he represented. The silence was broken by a sound from the side of the hall, where a reptilian diplomat from the Zathar Empire stepped forward. The Zathar, a fiercely independent species with a reputation for their aggressive diplomacy, were not known for gestures of submission. Yet, here was their representative, a figure cloaked in dark scales that shimmered like polished obsidian, lowering itself onto its knees in front of David. The ripple effect began. One by one, more alien delegates joined. The bioluminescent Shulkrai bent low, their glowing tendrils dimming in respect. The armored Kthari, who had once viewed humans as naive and weak, knelt, the metallic clang of their exoskeletons echoing through the chamber. Even the semi-liquid Kytaxians, who had difficulty mimicking such gestures, managed to fold their forms in a way that resembled a bow. It was an unspoken, unanimous decision that swept through the assembly like a wave, leaving no species untouched. David stood frozen, his mind reeling as he watched the scene unfold. He had come here expecting nothing more than a strange, confusing day at best, and now the most powerful beings in the galaxy were kneeling before him. He could feel his heart pounding, the raw emotion of the moment almost too much to bear. He wanted to protest, to tell them they were mistaken, that he was just a simple negotiator who had only done what anyone should do. But as he opened his mouth to speak, no words came out. Instead, tears welled up in his eyes. The overwhelming sense of humility, of being part of something far greater than himself, was too much to contain. In a gesture as instinctive as it was sincere, David dropped to his knees as well. He bowed his head, tears spilling down his cheeks, not as a sign of gratitude or acceptance, but as a sign of his own humility. He was not above these beings. He was one of them, just another life trying to do good in a vast, indifferent galaxy. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, vibrating with an unspoken understanding that transcended language. It was as if, in that moment, every being in the hall could feel the pulse of a shared heartbeat, the unity of countless lives interconnected by a single thread of compassion and understanding. It was a sacred moment, one that would be remembered for generations to come. The narrator's voice, soft yet resonant, cut through the silence. This is not the story of one man being honored, the voice explained. It is the story of a galaxy recognizing a simple truth, that in a universe of countless species and endless differences, it is the small, unassuming acts of kindness, the choices made with empathy and a desire to help, that shape our future. The camera panned across the kneeling figures, a sea of diverse beings united in an unthinkable gesture. The bowing aliens were not just showing respect to David Cross, but to the values of humanity that had quietly rippled out, changing the fabric of interstellar society. It was a symbol of acceptance, an acknowledgement that perhaps, despite all their flaws, the humans brought something vital to the galaxy, a drive to bridge divides, to heal, to build where others would break. And in that moment of collective silence and bowed heads, it felt as though the galaxy itself had paused to take a breath, united in a way it had never been before. As the ceremony concluded and the grand hall slowly emptied, the buzz of whispers and murmured conversations drifted into silence. The weight of what had just occurred lingered in the air like a tangible presence. David found himself walking alone down a quiet, dimly lit corridor of the Galactic Council building. He paused before a massive window, gazing out into the endless void of space. Stars glittered like distant beacons, a silent reminder of how vast and mysterious the universe truly was. Despite the overwhelming events of the day, here in this solitary moment, David felt like just another small part of something far greater. He didn't notice the Supreme Speaker approaching until the alien's reflection appeared beside his own in the glass. The speaker, now devoid of the grandeur it had displayed in the hall, seemed smaller, almost vulnerable. Its tentacle-like appendages, usually held high in formality, now hung relaxed. The speaker's voice, when it spoke, was softer, stripped of its usual authoritative tone. "You have given us something we did not know we needed, David Cross," the Supreme Speaker said, the universal translator rendering its alien language into something surprisingly gentle. "For years, the Council has struggled to find unity among our people. We have searched for leaders, warriors, diplomats, but what we needed was something simpler. We needed someone who could remind us of the values we had long forgotten." David turned to face the speaker, his expression a mixture of disbelief and quiet humility. "I never wanted any of this," he confessed, his voice tinged with exhaustion. "I wasn't trying to make a difference on such a grand scale. I just wanted to help where I could." The speaker's features, alien and difficult to read, softened in what might have been a smile. "And that," it replied, "is precisely why you were chosen today. You did not seek power or glory. You acted out of compassion and a desire to do what was right. That is what makes you, and your kind, remarkable." David looked back out at the stars, his reflection overlapping with the distant points of light. He took a deep breath, feeling the heaviness of the moment settle into his bones. "It feels like too much," he admitted, "like I'm just one man, standing against a tidal wave of history." "Perhaps," the Supreme Speaker agreed, "but a single stone can alter the course of a river. You have become that stone, David, and the ripple you created is already spreading." The scene transitions to a montage, a sweeping view of the galaxy's farthest reaches. On a distant battlefield where two rival fleets once faced off, the ships now power down their weapons, inspired by the news of the ceremony. Captains on both sides exchange tentative but hopeful messages, beginning peace talks where once there was only hostility. Elsewhere, on a war-torn planet, a human aid worker steps into a refugee camp. The local population, once wary and distrustful, now rushes forward, embracing her as a symbol of hope. Her mere presence, in light of what had happened at the council, is seen as a promise of something better. The montage continues on Earth, where news broadcasts loop footage of the bowing ceremony. Families gather around their screens, watching in awe as the galaxy's most powerful beings honor a human. The camera cuts to a young child, staring at the broadcast with wide eyes, a sense of wonder lighting up his face. Can humans really do that? He asks, his voice full of innocent hope. The final shot pulls back, revealing the swirling arms of the Milky Way, a vibrant expanse of stars and distant worlds. The narrator's voice returns, gentle yet profound. In the end, it was not the act of bowing that changed the galaxy. It was the promise it held, a silent agreement that the values embodied by one unassuming human would become a beacon for all. It was a turning point, not just for humanity, but for everyone who chose to believe that compassion, humility, and the desire to do good could be the greatest strengths of all. The camera zooms out further, showing the entire galaxy as a small, bright speck against the infinite darkness. The narrator's final words echo softly. They bowed not out of submission, but out of a newfound hope for a united future. And in that moment, for the first time, the galaxy felt a little smaller, a little kinder, as if just for a second everyone understood that we are all part of the same vast, interconnected story. The screen fades to black, leaving viewers with a sense of awe and quiet inspiration, a fitting conclusion to a tale where humanity, against all odds, brought the galaxy together.